about 10 minutes in, someone's like, I'm not watching it. I don't know.
When was the last time your life was impacted by something that was measurable only in milliseconds? The time of a blink, maybe 200, 300 milliseconds. When was the last time you were changed by a fraction of the smallest denomination of time? Swimmers, maybe touching the wall at the end of a race if the stopwatch goes out that far into the count. Or maybe all of us as we're racing for school and our fingers just graze the closing subway doors. Seniors, maybe when you wait until 11:59 and 59 seconds before hitting that submit button, and those fractions of a fraction of a fraction of a second save you or destroy you. Most of the time, fractions of a second don't impact us, but sometimes when they do, they can change our lives completely. This is now my 7th Shakespeare assembly, my 7th opening. And over the years, as most of you know, I've regaled you with tales of the authorship controversy and the Globe Theatre burning down and then being rebuilt, and the Curse of Macbeth, and Shakespeare's prolific writing pace, and his shockingly deep understanding of human psychology, his iconic characters, his transcendent stories that have been published for centuries straight and translated across the world. I've told you about ways that he's affected us emotionally, even romantically, intellectually, socially, culturally, ethically, maybe even spiritually. But I've never had a chance to go into how Shakespeare affects us neurologically. I've stood on this stage and waxed poetic time and time again about how Shakespeare touches our hearts, but I've never had a chance to talk to you about how he impacts our minds. I don't mean that in some abstract, holistic way. I don't mean how he changes our personalities or changes our outlook on life or our understanding of the world. No, I mean literally how he changes the way your brain works. That's what I'd like to discuss today. The University of Liverpool in England has a renowned English department. There's a professor there named Philip Davis. And a few years ago, Philip Davis, who specializes in studying Shakespearean language, decided that he was going to go a little bit beyond what he usually does with his students. He was going beyond the dynamic or dusty discussions and lectures. Instead, he befriended some people in the neuroscience department. Then they together took his students and strapped electrodes to their heads. They strapped electrodes to their heads, and they used electroencephalography scans and functional magnetic resonance imaging to measure the electrical activity of their brains in response to Shakespeare. What they discovered didn't change necessarily the way we think about Shakespeare only in some academic or metaphorical way. What they discovered is that Shakespeare actually physically changes the way our brains think about Shakespeare. An N400. An N400 is your standard electrical brain response. It happens about 400 milliseconds after your typical perception or thought or reaction to a standard stimuli. Perfectly normal. A P600 is different. A P600 happens about 600 milliseconds after some perception or thought, usually in relation to something that's not quite right, something that seems irregular, something that seems like a mistake. And I know we're only talking here about the difference of 200 milliseconds, but in the world of the brain, when without exaggeration we are talking about the speed of thought, 200 milliseconds is an eternity. That P600 response, that's what the neurologists called hesitated consciousness. Your brain sees something, senses something, perceives something, and it's not quite sure what to do with it. It's not sure how to process it or where to send it in your head. It takes that extra amount of time. And from a neurology perspective, that's extraordinary. because it fires off everything else in your brain as once, trying to figure out what to do. It is your brain operating at peak activity. It is your brain operating as the best version of your intellectual self. Those P600 kind of responses are usually reserved for tastes, sights, feelings, new spicy food, a first look out at the Grand Canyon, skydiving for the first time. They tested a number of authors and a number of works, and no one came close to eliciting the level of P600 responses that Shakespeare elicited. And perhaps it's no surprise. Perhaps it's no surprise that reading Shakespearean language is, for our brains, the equivalent of skydiving for our bodies. Shakespeare does that to language. He stretches it into some experience that you've never seen or felt before. Sitting here, each of you right now, walking about in your day, over the course of your life, you're going to probably use anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 different words. That's your walking vocabulary, about 5,000 to 7,000. When you sit down to write, you'll use a little more. Over the course of your lifetime, you'll probably expand that to about 8,000 to 10,000. Shakespeare, over the course of 154 sonnets and 37 plays, used 17,677 different words. I don't mean that was his word count, I mean that was the number of different words that he used. Now the point here isn't necessarily that Shakespeare, perhaps not surprisingly, has a vocabulary that's almost double yours or mine. But the point is that of those 17,000 words that he used, somewhere between 1,700 and 2,000 of them were new. He made them up. He was using them for the first time, or for the first time in that way. Shakespeare had a facility with language that went beyond what most writers were capable of, even when trying. He would sometimes use words in different ways, changing adjectives into verbs. In The Winter's Tale, a character notoriously mentions thoughts that would thick my blood. A famous line from Twelfth Night changes a pronoun into a noun. Lady, you are the cruelest she alive. Shakespeare would take words and add prefixes to the beginning of them. Uncomfortable, that's his. Disheartened, that's his too. Or he would take words and add letters to the end of it. Amazement, marketable. He would change words that were already in the English language into something else for his purposes. And reading them, our brains have to then adjust somehow. He loved combining words for the first time. Outbreak was his. Bloodstained, half-blooded, cold-blooded, hot-blooded. There was a lot of blood in Shakespeare. And of course, he did what some of you do. Literally just concocted words out of thin air. It's not good what you do. Please stop it. When he did it, it was okay. It was great. Words that we don't even necessarily think of coming from him. Excellent. Think of every time you've had that written on a paper from a teacher. I mean, hopefully a lot. Excellence was a word that was made up by Shakespeare. It's never been put down anywhere else before him to play. Lonely, his word. Critical, majestic, obscene. Shakespeare created those words out of thin air for the purposes of his writing. Shakespeare's use of language changes how our brains process language. It quite literally changes the way we think. And today, at least for the course of this assembly, I'm proud to be a part of changing the way you think. Welcome to the National Shakespeare Competition. The Shakespeare Competition began back in 1975 with a man named Paul Beresford Hill. You should know that by now. An English teacher who later became the first headmaster of the Anglo-American school, which later, of course, merged with Dwight. He presented the idea of this national competition where students would get up on stage and present a memorized monologue and performance. It began back then with about 500 students. As of last year, in the 43 years since he began this, more than 23,000 students across the country have participated. Here at Dwight, as you know, we start with the preliminary rounds in the classrooms. Then, the top 5 or 6 students from each grade move on to the semifinal rounds, and they're judged by the entire English department. And today, you will see the top students from each of those grades here performing as finalists. Over the last week, those finalists have worked to perfect this monologue. And I need to take a moment to thank our theater teacher, Ms. Gazowski. Ms. Gazowski has spent a staggering amount of time bringing her expertise and experience working with Shakespeare and Shakespeare acting and Shakespeare directing to those students. Without her, we would not be coming close to seeing the level of quality that we're going to see here today. The students will be judged according to a variety of criteria about their facial expressions, their body movements, and their voice, and their interpretation of the monologues. And in order to help us do so, we, as always, have a distinguished panel of guest judges here with us today. We start with Mr. Haber. Mr. Haber brings a career's worth of expertise with respect to psychology and interpreting Shakespeare's monologues is one of the best applications of psychology. Thank you for lending your expertise today, Mr. Haber. We have Ms. Connor from our EAL department who has studied and taught English language across the world in Australia and Costa Rica and Mongolia. Thank you for bringing your years of experience here today as well. Ms. Dalton is new to Dwight this year at our Quest department, but she's already established some firm, devoted bonds with the students, and I appreciate you bringing your unique perspective to the panel for the first time today. And lastly, Mr. Chris Gow. Do I need to say no? Okay. Mr. Chris Gow, that's fine. Ms. Ballard is going to be checking the accuracy of the monologues here today. At a morning meeting sometime early next week, I'll be announcing a winner for each grade, as well as a full school Dwight winner. And that Dwight champion will represent our school in the citywide competition at the end of February. A quick thank you to Arthur Zani, Jonathan Deaver, Hatter Schaffner, and Mr. Brett up top for photography and video recording for today. And now, just one last note, and by now you know what that is. I'm going to ask you to pay particular attention, to respect the performances today, to laugh when they bring their boisterousness and wit, and to remain deathly silent when they are whispering out some shock or some grief as part of their character. Keep in mind that the students you're going to see up on this stage today are doing something that most people in this room, I think, myself included, would consider absolutely brave. They could stand up here and read a subway map, and it would be brave because they'd be doing it from up here. So as they're performing, please give them your undivided attention, and when they break at the end and say thank you, bring this house down with your applause, because they will deserve it. And if you want, later, you can Google it to see the brain scans that prove it. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on with the performance. We start in our 9th grade. And if we're starting in 9th grade, of course, we're going to start with Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers. In this scene, Romeo has just killed Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, who, of course, had just killed Romeo's friend, Mercutio. Juliet learns that Romeo killed her cousin, knows that she should grieve, but she finds out that She finds out as she's moving through the processes of emotions that she's not as sad as she thinks she should be. That in fact she's somewhat happy because Romeo, who secretly is her husband, is still alive. Even though she comes soon to recognize that perhaps his banishment from Verona would be a fate worse than death, not only for him but for her. Ladies and gentlemen, Melissa Fuhrer.
Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband? Ah, poor my lord. What tongue shall smooth thy name when I, thy 3 hours' wife, have mangled it? But wherefore, villain, didst thou kill my cousin? The villain cousin would have killed my husband. Oh, back, foolish tears, back to your native spring. Your tributary drops belong to woe, which you, mistaking, offer up to joy. My husband lives, that Tybalt would have slain, and Tybalt's dead, that would have slain my husband. All this is comfort. Wherefore we buy that? Some word there was, worse than Tybalt's death, that murdered me. I would forget it fain, but oh, what presses to my memory, like damned, guilty deeds to sinner's mind. Tybalt is dead, and Romeo banished. That banished, that one word banished, has slain 10,000 Tybalts. Thank you.
We now have somewhat of a twist. We have 2 performances of the same monologue coming up, both from King Lear. Now, in this famous tragedy, King Lear decides to step down from the throne, and he wants to divide his kingdom based on a test where he has to judge his daughter's claimed love for him. He has 3 daughters. And the 2 daughters that deceitfully flatter him, of course, are given each half of the kingdom, and the honest and kind daughter gets absolutely nothing. The scene you're about to see occurs about midway through the play. The 2 deceitful daughters, now with power, have rejected their father, and they've cast King Lear out, emotionally and physically. In this monologue, he's stumbling out in the middle of a vicious storm. He's cursing the weather. He's cursing his daughters. And then he accuses the weather of conspiring with his daughters against him as he slides into madness and rage. We begin with Jorge Luis Sanchez Lara Alonso.
Blow winds and crack your cheeks. Rage! Blow! You cataracts and hurricanos! Spout! Till you have drenched our steeples, drowned the cocks. You sulphurous and thought-executing fires! Vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts, singe my white head! And thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of this world, crack nature's molds, all germanes, spill at once, which makes ingrateful man. Rumble thy bellyful, spit, fire, spout, rain, nor rain. Wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, infirm, weak, and despised old man. But yet, I call you servile ministers that will with two pernicious daughters join your high engendered battles against a head so old and white as this. Oh! Oh! 'Tis foul!
Stay in the ninth grade, we stay with King Lear, we stay with the monologue, and for his own take on it, Justin Chen.
Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks, rage. Blow, you cataracts and hurricanes. Spout till you have drenched the steeples, drowned the cocks. You sulphurous and thought-executing fires. Vultures of oak-clinging thunderbolts, singe my white head. And thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. Crack nature's molds, all germane spilled at once, that makes ingrateful man. Rumble thy bellyful, spit, fire, spout, rain! Nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. Then let fall your horrible pleasure. Here I stand, your slave, a poor, weak, infirm, and despised old man, but yet I call you servile ministers, that will with two pernicious daughters join your high engendered battle against a head so old and white as this. Oh, 'tis foul. Thank you.
Moving on to the 10th grade now, and just as we started with Romeo and Juliet in the 9th grade, perhaps it's appropriate we start with Julius Caesar in the 10th grade. Caesar was the dictatorial leader of Rome, famously assassinated. In this scene in the play, it takes place before his assassination. We're still in the planning phase. Among those people that are conspiring to kill him is Brutus, one of his closest friends. Brutus is married to Portia. Portia has noticed that her husband has been acting anxious, restrained, sneaking out in the middle of the night to meet disguised men, but Brutus won't share any of his troubled thoughts or his plans with her. In this monologue, Portia is telling Brutus how she's noticed him acting so unlike him, so distressed, and she begs him to tell her the reasons behind it all. Ladies and gentlemen, Kai Kelly.
What? Is Brutus sick? And will he steal out of his wholesome bed to dare the vile contagion of the night, and tempt the roomy and unpurged air to add into his sickness? No, my Brutus. You have some sick offense within your mind, which by the right and virtue of my place I ought to know of. And upon my knees I charm you, by my once commended beauty, by all your vows of love, and by that great vow which did incorporate and make us one, that you would fold to me yourself, your half. Why you are heavy, and what meant tonight have had resort to you? For here have been some 6 or 7 who did hide their faces even from darkness. I should not need if you were gentle, Brutus. Within the bond of marriage, tell me, Brutus, is it accepted I should know no secrets that appertain to you? Thank you.
In the 10th grade still, we now move on to Macbeth. The title character of this famous tragedy is a Scottish lord and general, and he's visited at the beginning of the play by 3 witches that give him a prophecy that he will one day be king. Now, either in pursuit of that prophecy or because of it, Macbeth devises a plan to kill the current king, Duncan, when Duncan visits him, Macbeth, at his castle. In this scene, Macbeth to himself voices tremendous hesitation about his own murderous plans, worrying that justice will rise against him, that he'd be violating his duties as subject and host to Duncan, that Duncan, who was such a humble king, his death would disrupt the land, and that Macbeth himself might not only have an inability when it comes to it, but be driven solely by the ambition which he knows can lead him to tragedy. I invite you to see Ben Chernoul.
We still have judgment here. That we but teach bloody instructions, which being taught return to plague the inventor. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our own poisoned chalice to our own lips. He's here in double trust. First, as I'm his kinsman and his subject, strong both against the deed. Then as his host, who should against his killer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off. And pity, like the naked newborn babes riding the blast, for heaven's cherubim horse shall blow this horrid deed across every eye. Tears shall drown the wind. I've no spur to prick the sides of my intent, only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. Thank you. Love you.
Still in the 10th grade, we move on to Richard II. Richard is not a particularly effective king. His indecisiveness and arbitrariness eventually lead other nobles to rise up against him. In the play, he's returned from a war in Ireland to find that his soldiers have all abandoned him, his allies have all been turned against him or killed, and that he himself is about to lose the crown and most likely his life. In this monologue, Richard resolves himself to his fate. He muses that death merely toys with us before taking our lives, and that every king at some point inevitably faces murder for their acts or for their crown. He eventually concludes that he is just like everyone else, like his few remaining friends, that he is merely human and not a king at all. And at that point, he's right. Kate Schlein.
For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. How some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed, all murdered. For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court. And there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little scene to monarchize, be feared, and kill with looks, confusing him with self and vain conceit. Cover your heads, and mock not flesh and blood with solemn reverence. Throw away respect, tradition, form, and ceremony's duty, for you have but mistook me all this while. I live with bread like you. I feel want, taste grief, need friends. Subjected thus, how can you say to me, I am a king? Thank you.
All right. We're moving on to the 11th grade now, and the play is Henry VIII. Queen Catherine has been married to Henry VIII for more than 20 years. She's been a loving and devoted wife. However, Henry's religious advisor, for his own conspiratorial reasons, somehow convinces the king that he needs to now divorce Catherine. In this speech, which takes place in open court in front of all the king's advisors and attendants, Catherine confronts her husband, demanding to know what she has done wrong that is so severe that it justifies ending their lengthy marriage. This is a public show of personal strength by a woman in the throes of a very public and personal betrayal. Ladies and gentlemen, Regina Castellano.
In what have I offended you? What cause hath my behavior given to your displeasure, that thus you should proceed to put me off and take your good grace from me? Heaven witness, I have been to you a true and humble wife, at all times to your will, conformable, ever in fear to kindle your dislike. Yea, subject to your countenance, glad or sorry, as I saw it inclined. When was the hour I ever contradicted your desire, or made it not mine too? If, in the course and process of this time, you can report and prove it too against mine honor aught, to my bond of wedlock, or my love and duty against your sacred person, in God's name, turn me away to the thou's content. Shut door upon me, and so give me up to the sharpest kind of justice. Thank you.
Vamos on now to Measure for Measure. It's known as one of Shakespeare's problem plays in that it doesn't easily fit in one category. It's listed historically mostly as a comedy, but its themes of justice and morality are usually punctuated by very somber and heart-wrenching scenes. In this particular scene, we meet Claudio. Claudio has been imprisoned because he has gotten his lover pregnant, technically before they were married. And in the eyes of the law, that is not only a crime, it is a crime that must lead to his execution. In this speech, Claudio, in prison, awaiting his execution, describes his vivid fears of death and relegates himself to the knowledge that even a hated, terrible, difficult life would have been better for him than not living at all. Ladies and gentlemen, Hanalakta.
Death is a fearful thing. Aye, but to die and go we know not where. To lie in cold obstruction and to rot. This sensible warm motion to become a netted clod. And the delighted spirits to bathe in fiery floods or to reside in the thrilling region of thick-ribbed ice, to be imprisoned in the viewless winds and blown with restless violence round about the pendant world, or to be worse than worse, of those that lawless and uncertain thought. Imagine howling 'tis too horrible. The weariest and most loathed worldly life that age, ache, penury, and imprisonment can lay on nature is a paradise. To what we fear of death. Thank you.
Now move on to Henry VI, Part 3. There are 3 parts to it. Shakespeare's series of Henry VI plays deals with the War of the Roses in England in the mid to late 1400s, mainly between the supporters of King Henry and the House of York. Queen Margaret is married to Henry. And in this scene follows a battle in which York was captured and his son Rutland was killed. Now Margaret herself is a powerful and passionate woman, but perhaps also manipulative and maybe even cruel. In this speech, she mocks York's desire to be king. She sarcastically places a paper crown on his head. She berates him for not showing enough emotion at the death of his own son. And she reminds him that he had made an oath not to try to attempt to take the crown when Henry was still alive, an oath that he's now broken and for which he will pay his life. Estelle is a character.
What? Hath thy fiery heart so parched thine entrails that not a tear can fall for Rutland's death? art thou patient, man? Thou shouldst be mad, and I, to make thee mad, do mock thee thus. Stamp, rave, and fret, that I may sing and dance. Thou wouldst be feed, I see, to make me sport. York cannot speak unless he wear a crown. I, marry sir, now looks he like a king. I, this is he that took King Henry's chair, and this is he was his adopted heir. But how is it that great Plantagenet is crowned so soon, and broke his solemn oath? As I bethink me, you should not be king till our King Henry had shook hands with death. And will you pale your head in Henry's glory and rob his temples of the diadem, now, in this life, against your holy oath? Oh! 'Tis a fault. Too unpardonable. Off with the crown. And with the crown, his head. And whilst we breathe, take time to do him dead. Thank you.
All right, now we move up to our seniors. We begin with Othello, the title character in this tragedy. The general is a proud, brave man who dearly loves his wife, Desdemona. Unfortunately for him, he also trusts his ensign, Iago, who's actually traitorous. Iago conspires to convince Othello that Desdemona has been unfaithful to him. In this scene, Othello walks into Desdemona's bedroom as she sleeps. He plans to murder her for her infidelity, for the hurt that she's caused him. But Othello himself is torn apart. He finds himself conflicted by the feelings of love that he still has for her beauty and her sweetness, and yet his knowledge, or what he believes is his knowledge, that she has been unfaithful to him. In this speech, he cannot stop himself from even kissing his sleeping wife as he stands over her, ready to kill her. We begin with Anisa Jahanjir.
It is the cause. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, chaste stars. It is the cause. Yet, I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers in snow and smooth as monumental alabaster. And yet, she must Die, else she will betray more men. Put out the light. And then put out the light. If I quench thee, thy flaming minister, it can again thy former light restore, should I repent me. When I have plucked the rose, I cannot give it vital growth again. It needs must wither. I'll smell it on the tree. Oh, balmy breath that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword one more. One more. Be thus when thou art dead, and I will kill thee and love thee after. One more. And this, the last. So sweet was ne'er, so fatal. I must weep, but these are cruel tears. This sorrow is heavenly, it strikes where it doth love. She wakes. Thank you.
We move on to what's generally considered to be Shakespeare's most bloody, most violent play, Titus Andronicus. Titus is the leader of the Roman army who gets locked into a cycle of vengeance and murder with his enemies. At this point in the play, Titus has just won a battle against Tamora, queen of the gods, a passionate woman. She's been captured alive, as has her 3 soldier sons, and all of them as prisoners have now been brought back to Rome. Titus plans to execute Tamora's eldest son right there, right then, in front of her. And in this monologue, Tamora pleads passionately and frantically for mercy, for Titus to spare her son's life. Serena Corce.
But must my sons be slaughtered in the streets for valiant doings in their country's cause? Oh, if to fight for king and commonweal were piety in thine, it is in these. Andronicus, stain not thy tomb with blood. Wilt thou draw near to the nature of the gods? Draw near them then in being merciful. Sweet mercy is nobility's true badge. Thrice noble Titus, spare my firstborn son. Thank you.
We did Romeo and Juliet in the 9th and Caesar in the 10th, so of course, we've also got As You Like It. As You Like It is one of Shakespeare's great comedies, and like so many comedies of his and even our time, it revolves around love, the trials and travails of love. Here we meet Phoebe. She's speaking to Silvius, farmer, shepherd. Silvius loves Phoebe with all of his heart, and she, of course, does not love him at all. He fears that she's going to reject him, but he knows he can't take the harshness of it. He begs her, compares her to an executioner. Not always the best idea if you're talking to the woman you love, but in this case, he tries to use the lesson of an executioner who apologizes to his victims before, of course, chopping their heads off. Silvius begs Phoebe to let him down easy. And in this monologue, you'll see that, needless to say, she does not do that. Ladies and gentlemen, Jada Sunshine Morgan.
I would not be thy executioner. I fly thee, for I would not injure thee. Thou tell'st me there is murder in mine eye. 'Tis pretty, sure, and very probable that eyes that are the frailest and softest things who shut their coward gates on atomies should be called tyrants, butchers, murderers. Now, I do frown on thee with all my heart, and if mine eyes can wound, now let them kill thee. Now, counterfeit to swoon. Why, now fall down. Or, if thou canst not, oh, for shame, lie not to say mine eyes are murderers. Now show the wound mine eye hath made in thee. Scratch thee but with a pin, and there remains some scar of it. But now mine eyes, which I have darted at thee, hurt thee not, nor I am sure there is no force in eyes that can do hurt.
According to Renaissance tradition, the wounds on the body of someone who has been murdered will reopen if that body comes into proximity with the murderer again. In this play, Richard III, we meet Lady Anne. Lady Anne has suffered the murder of both her husband and his father, King Henry, both at the hands of the title character, Richard. In this scene, Lady Anne enters with servants and attendants, accompanied by the coffin that bears the body of King Henry. When Richard enters, of course, she turns on him viciously. She begs for vengeance. She accuses him of the murder of her husband and of his father. And she points to the wounds on the corpse of Henry, which to her sight have now again started to bleed. For our last monologue of the session, Abigail Rader.
Foul devil! For God's sake, hence and trouble us not, for thou hast made the happy earth thy hell. Filled it with cursing cries and deep exclaims. Oh, gentlemen, see dead Henry's wounds open their congealed mouths and bleed afresh. Blush, thou lump of foul deformity, for 'tis thy presence that exhales this blood from cold and empty veins where no blood dwells. Thy deeds, inhuman and unnatural, provokes this deluge most unnatural. O God, which this blood made revenges death. O earth, which this blood drinks revenges death. Either heaven with lightning strike the murderer dead, or earth gape open wide and eat him quick. As thou dost swallow up this good king's blood, which his hell-governed arm hath butchered. Thou knowest nor law of God nor man, no beast so fierce but knows some touch of pity.